Hello, it's Clara, and my topic is armed conflicts. First of all, we have to determine what is armed conflicts. Armed conflicts is an armed confrontation between states or social communities within individual states aimed at resolving economic, political, national, ethnic, and other contradictions through the limited use of military force. And there are four types of armed conflicts. And the first type, and the conventional conception of war was understood as an armed conflict between two states. If such conflict occurred, the laws of war automatically applied. And the second type of the war is the civil war, which is a condition of armed conflict between the state and the internal rebel movement which took up arms. Only if the host state or the third state recognizes the rebels as warring parties and the laws of war enter into force between the parties. And the third type of the armed conflicts is international armed conflicts. It is opposing two or more states. And the last type of the armed conflicts is non-international armed conflicts between governmental forces and non-governmental armed groups or between such groups only. And the next one is the nature of armed conflicts. Armed conflicts within states are political conflicts involving citizens fighting for internal change, such as struggles have taken place recently in Asia and Europe. And second larger category of armed conflicts within states often involves a group of people who are armed and ready to fight for the goal of seizing governmental power. Sometimes conflicts are matters of organized crime as opposed to politics, and money is also a motivator for these groups. And unlike members of secessionist movements, such as groups are generally prepared to continue to live in the same territory with other groups, regardless of the outcome of the conflicts. And most armed conflicts are fought not only by regular armies but also by militias and armed civilians with little discipline and with ill-defined chains of combat. Another important feature in such conflicts is usually collapse of the institutions of the state, especially the police and judiciary, with resulting paralysis of governments and breakdown of law and order and general banditry. And fighting in most conflicts is usually intermittent with a wide range in intensity. It usually occurs not on well-defined battlefields but in and around communities and is often characterized by personalized acts of violence, such as atrocities committed by former neighbors and, in extreme cases, genocide. And homegrown weapons acquired by warring parties either through the purchases of currency and through so-called the parallel financing, which included selling and bartering goods such as diamonds, oil, woods, and coffee, etc. And brief ceasefires characterize most armed conflicts, and armed conflicts may end in many ways, including through peace agreements entered into by the warring parties to explicitly regulate or resolve contentious issues. And many child soldiers have been deliberately recruited, others abducted, and some coerced into fighting to protect their families. Boys as young as 6 have been picked from schools and indoctrinated into small boys units. And the next topic we have to determine the causes of armed conflicts. In many instances, weak governments have little capacity to stop the eruption and spread of violence, and that better organized and uh, more legitimate governments could have prevented or contained. And countries afflicted by war typically also suffer sharp inequalities among social groups. It's and this rather than poverty that seems to be a critical factor, although poor countries have been far more likely to be involved in armed conflicts. And in some countries in sub-Saharan region struggles for control over key natural resources such as diamonds and gold, coupled with wider political ambitions, have increased the level of intensity of armed conflicts. And ethnic and religious animosities, violations of human minority rights, and ethnic cleansing resulting from extreme forms of nationalism propagated by hate media are factors and that uh, exaggerate conflict. And, and the last topic is the impact of armed conflict on society. Modern internal wars tend to take more severe casualties on civilians than interstate wars. Therefore, combatants are increasingly targeting civilians' strategic goal. And societies ravaged by armed conflicts have paid a massive toll in loss of human life and economic, political, and social disintegration. More than 4 million people are estimated to have been killed in violent conflicts since the fall of the Berlin Wall. And sexual violence is another ruthless weapon of war. Warring parties resort to rape and sexual slavery of women to humiliate, intimidate, and terrorize on one another, as in the recent conflicts in Bosnia and Herzegovina. And Rwanda, rape has been a weapon of ethnic cleansing aimed to humiliate and ostracize women and young girls for bearing the enemy's child and to eventually destroy communities. Women and children in particular suffer unspeakable atrocities in armed conflicts. In the past decade, according to one estimate, up to a million of those killed in armed conflicts were children, and 3 times as many have been seriously injured or permanently disabled, many of them maimed by landmines, and millions were psychologically scared by violence. Millions of children suffer from starvation and diseases as a result of war, and the high incidence of uh, malnutrition diseases and the deaths among young children is attributed to war tactics of disruption, the production and distribution of food supplies. Wars have separated millions of children from their families. In 1994, the war in Rwanda left 100 million children without families. And anti-personnel mines, which come in different shapes and sizes, are especially dangerous for children who are unable to read warning signals and mistake them for toys. And refugees and internally displaced persons are the symbols of wars, communal violence motivated by ethnic or religious hatred, persecution, and intolerance. Countries affected by armed conflicts or internal strife generally have large numbers of refugees and displaced persons. Although such factors as natural disasters and widespread human rights violations have contributed to the number of displaced persons. Thank you for attention.